now finishing with the man and the master himself, Randy Huntington. Randy and I, we were just talking before we started. Randy and I first met in the early 90s, and he was very, very much a mentor for me and probably many people, and still is today. Somebody I definitely consider ahead of the curve and ahead of my curve, and somebody that's just an incredible resource. But we met back in the 90s when I was building what was then Canada's premier high performance gym at the University of British Columbia. Early days, Randy was doing consulting with Kaiser equipment. I think we brought the first line of Kaiser equipment into Canada or Western Canada. And so those were early days for me. And at that time, Randy was teaching me about the mechanics of speed and speed versus strength, because that was also the days when everybody was just squatting, and Kaiser was already in front of the curve. And here we are years later, and we've reconnected at many points over the years in Asia, North America. And Randy, we were just talking about, we've reconnected with Exogen for almost a decade already. When I think, and I'm not sure how you first found out about it and that, but I'm going to turn it over to you. We're super excited to have you here, and we're going to be talking about a lot of interesting topics. So, Randy Huntington.
Thanks, Joseph. Appreciate it. For those of you that are watching, if you could turn your videos off, and I apologize for that because it is such a poor, I'm having to use VPN as well as, I'm using 2 VPNs to try to make this work. So if you could turn your videos off, that would, if you have a question, turn your video back. Yeah, this is, this is, we got 10 years and 30 years almost, Joseph, for yes. When I was working with Kaiser back in the day. And, the metamorphosis of this, if you will, or the way that I have grown over the years with respect to what we're doing with Exogen is, back in the days, which was for me was really in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, when I first started using ankle weights. Of course, at the time it was heavy ankle weights, which then progressed to 500 gram and then eventually to 250 gram ankle weights. And then vests, weight vests were big for us back in the 70s and 80s. And then shorts, weighted shorts came out really 88, 89, somewhere right in there. So we were using those. I was using those with Mike Powell and Willie Banks back in the day, and then and into the 90s, as long as I had those. So there's been tools similar to this for years. And when I first saw the Exogen, which was an ad, gosh, but it was quite some time ago. And it had to be something coming over either Facebook or it wasn't Instagram at the time, but there was a picture, and I looked at this picture and went, wait a minute, okay, so we can take this and we can load the extremities as we wish, different varying weights. Now this makes sense to me, and that's when I got interested. I happened to be in China at the time as well, and I'm only back to China for a short time. For those of you wondering if I've semi-retired, my semi-retirement, I ended up back in China. But the distributor I happened to know in China, and so I asked him to give me a pair so we could try them out. And that was just before I started working with Bingtian. And we ended up then going to work using them with Sue. Okay. Sue had a lot of different issues, and I think you've got that video there, Joseph. You might want to play that.
Sure. Let me just,
because I'm going to go into an explanation of how I think about it after they see that video. Most of you have seen this.
Yeah, this was actually a news story out of China. So. Let me share this now. Hey, of course, welcome, Randy. And let me get this up on a full slide.
I can't hear it. I don't know if anybody else can.
Volume, no.
This is yeah, it's not coming over, but this is me
No
explaining
video.
how there's video, just no sound.
Okay, one sec, guys. One sec. It's playing for me. Let me try that one more. Maybe I have to turn on my camera. One sec, guys. Let me just adjust and let me share. Give me a sec.
If it doesn't work, it's okay. I can
Yeah,
explain some things.
and it'll be in the record later. And let me just tell me if you can give it a sec here while it starts. It's fired up.
No, I don't think you have enough bandwidth at this point. It's okay. I'll explain it. You can take that off.
Here, try this.
So in the case of Sue, what I saw, with because we're using I use a lot of tools, as you guys may know. I mean, we've got Kaiser. I use 1080 or T-Apex, mostly T-Apex these days, unless I'm doing assisted, in which I'm still using 1080 when I do assisted running. And then we moved on to looking at where Sue was having some specific problems. Dr. Ralph Mann and I went through, because I brought Ralph over in 2019, and we started um, to see where we could solve some of the problems. And one of the things we get, particularly with small guys who have short levers and have a lot of frequency, they tend to overcook the front side, which means they get up and back down too quick, so their stride length is then minimized. So we had to find a way to get Sue to feel where his stride was, because he couldn't feel it. And this is where you'll hear me use the term compliance. Now, what Exogen did for me there is it allowed me to use a piece of hardware to get Sue to feel proprioceptively where his foot was and his shin was. So we could take, and we were doing all these different drills. So he wore these constantly. So we started to get him to understand that his recovery heel was too high. He needed to bring that down. And then by bringing that down, that generated more horizontal, more force, and then it generated more horizontal force down the track. Instead of a vertical force, we got more horizontal force. But he would nothing to get him to feel that. So this is a proprioceptive tool in this particular case. And don't overlook the use of the ability to use weights or resisted along the lever, the entire lever, particularly in sprinting of the leg, to get them to feel where their foot is in space and time. Because quite frankly, it's a difficult thing for them to find their foot. That, believe it or not, they just don't know where it is. They don't realize they're butt kicking, for instance. Show it to them on video and they still don't get it. But once you put some mass on that leg, and then you can maneuver it, so you put it up closer to the knee and then slowly bring it down, so they're starting to feel where it is. You can help them understand now what to do in the mechanics of the actual sprint. Anybody
And
have any questions on that particular part of it, the proprioceptive part, in terms of complying with the hardware? It's I like the term. I've used it for years and years. It's
Yes, Randy, I have a
they
question.
automatically comply to it. Yeah, shoot.
So
Go ahead.
when you first started using the Exogen, But yeah, how you doing? It's Garfield. I don't know if you remember me from some years ago.
Yeah, yeah,
But
Garfield. Sure.
the you started out with them closer to the knee and then worked your way down, and that was in order for them to be able to feel that the lower extremity.
It was actually I did that because what we saw when we were looking at the models with Ralph is that his knee was coming up too high and then back down too quickly. So first I needed to let him feel where his the area just below his knee was, because we actually had to take that and move it. We had to get him thinking about moving the kneecap down the track. So I put it a little bit lower, just below the knee, and then I started moving it down because then he was casting. But he was casting before that,
Okay.
and it's really, everybody knows how hard it is to stop the cast, but because you have to do it at some point. And I did not want to hurt him because he was casting. So I kept it closer to the knee at first, then slowly but surely brought it down. Now that's what he was, Garfield, that's when he was actually running with it. Okay. In drilling, I had it down on the ankle. I had the weights lower. So
Oh,
I played
okay.
with
So
the weights
drilling
up and
lower
down
than
the
actual
lever
running.
to
Okay. Okay.
I
Yeah.
kept it higher at first, yeah, because when you have that mass, I mean, when you're casting that leg and those hamstrings are trying to stop that shin from going out where it wants to go, if they're not technically running well yet, yeah, you have to put it closer, or they're going to end up getting in trouble with the hamstring. It's a lot. It's a lot of extra force with even 100 grams. It's a lot of extra force on the hamstrings trying to deaccelerate it. And
Well,
at one level,
Okay.
it's actually really good because you're training it. You're training it to do that. You just have to train it slower at first, and then it helps you strengthen the hamstrings, and particularly that elastic
Okay.
reaction of
Okay.
the hamstrings when that lower leg goes out. Sorry, I interrupted
Got
you.
it.
Do you have
Thank you very
another
much.
question? My bad.
Oh no, you're fine. Thank you.
and
Okay.
that's
Okay.
something, those things are clearly outlined now. Again, as you know, Randy, when we started with this, uh, most of the world, in fact, very few people, if anybody, really understood high level loading on the body during movement. So we had to spend time trying to learn that, like that proximal and distal load. You and I were just talking about that casting problem, proprioceptive problem. So the one thing to remember is now you know why, even at the highest levels, and you're hearing someone talk about it with elite athletes all the way through the spectrum, is it, the first progression when you're talking about wearable resistance is actually proximal to distal, not more load.
Yeah. Yep. And
So
Garfield,
go
with
ahead.
hurdle drills, for instance, it's the same. When you're starting people out in their hurdling drills, the young kids particularly cast a lot. So, and they don't know where their feet are. They don't know where their foot is with respect to their knee, for instance. So when you're doing hurdling drills, it's a great tool to be able to utilize there as well. And I used it extensively in hurdling drills when I was working with Stephen, who was China's #1 hurdler at that time, male hurdler. And back in the day, of course, when I was coaching Sharon Couch, I used ankle weights with Sharon, 250-gram and 100-gram ankle weights. I um, and that's where I got this concept of moving up and down. So I said, get the knee and then proximal to distal. Um, it Don't be afraid of that. And if you want to, for us, if you think about long-term athlete development model, we know that we want to try to develop the kids sprinting model between 9 and 12 or 13. And so loading them with a smaller version of this and teaching them drills with this helps them understand where everything is in their body and gives them unique coordination. When I looked at Sue from year 1 to year 2, he went from a robot to smooth speed. I mean, it was just smooth fast, we call it. It was fun to watch. And it's happened with everybody. They all do the same thing.
We saw that with Dennis's group, and it was that he said the shape has changed. I remember we worked the warm-up protocol, and he said, again, we started them in the drilling, we started them in warm-ups, we started them slowly before we had let them have any chance of high level speed loading, just to make sure joint tissue resilience, everything was there. But he said the shape of their running has changed already. And they could feel, and the athletes could feel it. I'd see TT and Shikari walking back on the track after a certain loading, and they'd be talking to each other about what they felt. Did you feel this? Did you feel that? Yes, I did. So it was what you were talking about. And of course, that's the most elite level, but we see this with youth kids too, is being aware of their body. And this kind of goes back to the slide being back up. And I think just to dive a little more, Randy, Su Bingtian, you in that video, you said, he had some technical issues, had some power issues, and you said specifically, general power, he had strength but not power, but also specific body part power, and then consistency overall. Maybe touch on these just from the coaching perspective, the sprinting perspective. I mean, of course, the product might be part of that, but just in general, because these are things a lot of people see in speed athletes they're working with. And when you have multiple issues, where do you start?
Let's look at where Sue's issues were. His lower extremity strength was quite poor, and I think anybody who's seen me talk about it knows what I'm talking about in terms of his soleus strength was very, very poor. Now, so using the 1080 at that time, we're doing a lot of acceleration with it, and we're seeing that he's doing first step. He finally was to get what we wanted in terms of moving the foot down and back, the inverted Nike sign, as I say. And then the problem was he was casting by step 3. So we had to figure out, okay, so how do we stop the casting? Because you can't feel it. So then we started, then we loaded them up, and you can see videos you've seen of directly to change the power output, because that was coming from the resistance, but it was to help him understand where it was in space and time so he could correct it. And once he could see the video, he could feel it. Now he can see, and then I've got the 1080 to back it up. I can go, look, you don't have to believe my eyes or the video, but look at the numbers. Look at what you're doing here. See this divot. Here's where you're collapsing and losing power in your first 4 steps. So that's just one way of utilizing it to help you understand how to change a technical component. And of course, y'all saw Tokyo and how fast he was in that first 30 and 60. And, fact is, and I take blame for this, I never got him enough speed and endurance. We just, quite frankly, ran out of time.
Wow.
And do I blame myself for that? Yeah, because I think he was ready to run about 978, 977 at that point. And when you start using all these tools, you can really start to achieve some things that you can do before. Like you can see his high butt kick there. And you can see, if you watch Tokyo, you'll start to see that this is 2019, by the way. A few years later, we're sitting with Ralph, and I'm sitting with Ralph, and where I'm going, look, Ralph, we're having trouble changing this. What do we do? What do you think? And he goes, I'm not the coach, Randy, which anybody's ever worked with Ralph hears him say. So I said, well, here's what I think we could do. And brought out the extra, put it on his shin, and you can see there he's wearing everything. This is when we were doing a GSSE workout, actually, where I made him wear this while he's doing glycolytic short speed endurance. And that's just an additional power component. And I call that vertical loading, by the way, Joseph. So I'm vertically loading the body. I'm adding mass to the body. Not a lot of mass, but some. And I use it a lot in jump drills. I use it when we're sprinting, and I'll vertically load because it doesn't take a whole lot of vertical load to create a lot more power when you look at the force, the speed component and the force component that changes when you add in a little bit of mass on the legs and the chest.
Now,
Randy, I do.
So,
go ahead,
Randy.
Yeah.
When you said vertical load, were you saying basically where you're placing them more to the front versus on the back?
No, vertical loading. I mean, I'm loading the whole body vertically.
Oh, okay.
So
From
I'm
top to
adding
bottom. Okay.
force to
Okay.
every foot contact. Sorry about that. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So vertical. So I use horizontal loading, which is this way, and vertical loading where I'm adding mass to the body. And so I call
Okay.
that when I add mass and I'm not looking at just drilling, and I look at vertical loading. I normally do it in plyometrics, coach. It's when we're doing box drills, we're doing bounding, and we're doing all different drills. I look at increasing the vertical load because I'm trying to increase what the body has to overcome. And then, of course, in sprinting, you don't want to do too much of that. But in jump, there's a part you do. We, of course, measure that in the opti jump when we have it, and we make sure we're not slowing him down too much by vertically loading him. You know, so that's always a key thing. Where's your foot contact time? Now, Sue's foot contact time, for those of you who never heard me say it, he went from about 0.087, 0.088 to 0.073. Fastest Ralph had ever um, uh, measured. So he was so fast off the ground, we had a problem. He couldn't feel the speed anymore. So this is an interesting way to use something like vertical loading. Like, actually, I loaded him to slow him down so he could feel the ground and use it, because he wasn't using it anymore. He was running over the top of it. He'd stopped putting force into the ground the way I wanted him to. And now this slowed him down just enough so he's at 0.078 from 073 to 078. Ralph and I measured it, and then he was rolling, and he had it. So they use these tools differently. Um, and you start thinking about what can I do to help them achieve what they need. Um, but I do want to, so I talk about vertical loading, which of course is total body loading, and then I talk about limb loading, and which is lever loading. And so you're looking at increasing the torque about the knee joint, which is usually not something you want to do, but increase the torque about the hip joint. And that's where you got the shorts and the shins as well. You load. Now you're increasing the torque about the hip joint, and you're drilling. You're not casting, so the velocity is lower, but you're still strengthening all that small muscles of the hip. And that's, now we all know how important that is to get them figuring out how to use their backside.
Randy, just I think
am
there's
I?
an interesting point there you mentioned, and loading, because when I started this last 23-year journey on wearable resistance, the first thing that kind of shocked me building this kit was because we're working with, elite athletes and putting it on them, you're getting really good feedback, very high level feedback. And what shocked me was we were trying to match a weighted vest at the time, an ankle weight in terms of load, pounds and kilos. But athletes were self-selecting loads that was like I had to rethink the whole thing we were trying to do. And light being the new heavy, the kind of things we comment on. You talked about the weighted vest. How much load were you talking about when you say it doesn't take a lot of load to get that component? You just quantified that from a 0.073 to a 0.078. Now, that was the load you were trying to get. When you think of a weighted vest, and again, I keep telling people, I get asked a lot, hey, is a weighted vest good? Should we be loading weight? And I said, well, everything's a tool. If you're just trying to do a big vertical jump, maybe 10 pounds is a good weighted vest. But if you're looking at reaction forces in the ground, you might want to rethink your loading.
Yeah, it's we played with it on the opti jump some, and take a look at what loads. In the early days, I never used big loads, by the way, guys. I just never did. It was intuitively, it didn't make sense to me because I was always concerned with ground forces and how to react to those forces. So even back in the day, a 10-pound load was a big load
Yeah.
for vertical loading. And, an ankle weight was 250 grams, and that was a huge load. Anything over that, we found too big slow them down too much. You know, power equals force times velocity. I mean, we really in track and field and in sport that we play in that genre all the time. So, you know, are you trying to increase force? Are you trying to increase velocity? Both increase power. Which type of power do you want? High velocity power or low velocity power? You know, depending upon your sport, depending upon what you need, let's say which part of the 100 meters, and how do you define high velocity and low velocity power for that matter. But I made a decision early on not to use heavy mass-based weights. I tried it. It just didn't work very well. I also like using it in our starts. We do a lot of block starts with them on. We do mostly because it also helps them find that fine point of balance between falling, and so it helps them deal with the vertical forces in the block start. And they get the first step then becomes even better because they're having to up and then back and yet still control the verticalness, and they have to get quicker. I mean, it has to be more powerful. So,
You know, yeah, I just started working with John Smith, the coach. John Smith, one of the best that's ever done it, and married to Lou, just got her kid, and we've been working with her a lot. And one of the things he said, you mentioned that, he said you have to catch the fall, and you catch that fall with speed. And that was the very first thing they targeted as well, that front side loading, just getting her more comfortable with catching that ball. And maybe you can comment on that because the start's such an interesting area. Dennis talked a lot about it because that's a mentality also. I mean, falling is a fear.
it is, particularly in the young kids. You know, with someone like Sue or any one of the Chinese sprinters that I had, you know, we were able to monitor. So I use the 1080 like at 1/10 of a kilo, and I use it as a monitoring tool. You know, so I want to see exactly what forces they're using. Sometimes 2/10, but you know, when we're actually training, we'll go up to. We never go in a 1080. With a sprinter, I've never gone over 13 kilos. Just it, you know, it. And for you guys who've been looking, not to get off subject, but the fact is, you hear people talk about force velocity curve on the 1080. You know, it's not a force velocity curve on the 1080, guys. The 1080 is so stupid, excuse me, that they haven't figured out that it's not the force velocity curve, it's the force on the ground velocity curve. So what happens in assisted is if you're pulling somebody, you got two problems. One, both technical. One, if you have too little force, you're too fast. But the same thing, if you have too much force, or if you have too much force, you can over pull them, or too much force, and they'll block. So now you have to figure out where's my force. And for the men, we found it was about 35 to 40. If you look at the sheet on the 1080, and for the women, somewhere between 30 and 35 approximately. But when you add, and with assisted, I would only do shorts and vest. If I did anything, I wouldn't ever do chins. And when you add that in, then you start to see, are they blocking or not? And so when you're using your 1080, folks, and you're going to use Exogen with it, unassisted, you have to look at, are they blocking? This is something I went through with Exos because they couldn't why they were having so many problems, and I walked them through how to look, because there's only a few people who understand it, and I can tell you 1080 certainly doesn't understand it because they keep preaching the wrong thing, which drives me a little crazy after, you know, I'm in my 10th year of using the 1080 now, and we're not friends much anymore, but it's off the subject. But it's one of those things where I really think when you're using it, you can use it in assisted, but don't overpull people. You can use Exogen safely in assisted if you don't go too fast, because it can help them understand how to get that bounce off the track. When you start losing the bounce, then you've got a problem, because that's why you're trying to pull. That's why you initially get somewhere and you start pulling or use your video. You're pulling, you're using, we use the OptiJump when we have it, but we'll pull through and look at ground contact times, and then we'll add mass, pull through, and I don't ever want to get too slow in that. But if they're technically not running right, I can see immediately, not only on the video, but I can show them that, look, you're having trouble getting your foot back down to the ground. So you have another problem. These are all our solutions. It's a big toolbox.
Yeah.
And they're great. They're great solutions.
And
I think drilling with it, probably, like particularly with your NFL guys and your combine guys, if any of you do that, drill with it. I wouldn't run with it much. You can accelerate short with it, but I would probably stay away from longer runs with it on with them, because they're just not that good as sprinters usually, and your potential for injury can rise, and you've got to be real careful with that. These are $1 million players, multi-billion-dollar players these days. And I've had several instances with players who big time casters, and you're trying to teach them, and then they get ahead of themselves, and then they get a little hamstring pain. So you've got to be careful.
and
Always be smart about what you're doing with that.
I think that brings
Somebody.
us to our next sort of case study, and well, not so much a case study, but talking about this transitioning Randy from sort of pure speed sprinter. I'm not sure if anybody else has any specific questions around someone like Bingtian. Randy is still there in China working with a multitude of high-level elite track and field athletes, but also works very directly with team sport athletes across the board. And you and I were talking about this. I've gone down. I run a lot of these combine programs. I've done this with Paris Saint-Germain, the All Blacks. When you're talking about those athletes, a couple of things you notice right off the bat. First off, you're right. They're not sprinters, so they don't have the kind of training sprinters have. They don't have 10, 20, 30 seconds of running in their legs on a straight line at high speed. Fatigue's one. Two, their limbs themselves are very heavy. They're at risk of injury just because of the weight of their limbs, some of those big players. And the third part is you often get very short time periods in which to work on something. A combine program's 2 months, maybe. And so you see these combine programs, they go in, they're trying to turn them into sprinters. There's a heck of a lot of work going on in those periods, maybe twice a days. And just monitoring load and considering the kind of things, one, to keep them safe, but two, realistically, what you can kind of do within that period to bring speed up in a team sport person, and the kind of things, someone like Christian McCaffrey, we talked about it. There's a nice, let me just put a point here, share screen. You called me up. Let me just get this up. One sec.
Well, I mean, a good and even better example is actually Bijan Robinson, who was with me and Christian and Luke this summer. And Bijan has, he's a scooter. I mean, he's such an incredible athlete. And these guys are both these guys are and Luke, who's the nicest people I've worked with. It was a pleasure to work with all of them. But it's Bijan faster, and yet his ability to change direction was absolutely amazing. I've only ever had one other athlete change direction like and Christian can do it, but bringing him back from those Achilles and everything that he was dealing with last year sort of limited us until we could get through that. But Henry Ellard, back in the day, Henry is a wide receiver for the Rams, and Henry is a triple jumper and a very good triple jumper. Henry could put his foot into the ground and change direction like nobody. The first time I put these on Bijan, it was like, okay, he'd like, but I wouldn't let him run fast. I'd only drill him, and we hit that and the activator belt. So I used those two things. activator belt forces into the ground, so they learn how to apply the force. Exogen to add the force because there's more mass. And when you start to, probably got the math figured out, but when you start doing the math with the velocities we're doing drilling at, it's a significant amount of force that you're dealing with. And you take a 30-centimeter box, let's see you're doing box jumps. It's a significant amount of force if you add just 1 kilogram total body weight. It's surprising how much force you get. And we look at running and then jumping, and because I'm loosely defined as a triple jump coach these days, China doesn't let me coach the triple jumpers for whatever reason. When you look at the total amount of force that they're dealing with, up to a bad triple jumper can be 30 times body weight on one leg, 30 times. We've seen it, we've measured it, and still not break a leg. But most of the time it's between 15 and 20 body weights. You can't duplicate that without potentially hurting somebody or drilling. So just a little bit of mass, total mass, really can enhance what you're doing. And all the football guys
Randy,
felt that, by the way. They felt the new torque in the hips. Yeah.
Yep.
Randy, would you
talking?
ever use the it's Pedro. I'm from Brazil. Nice to talk to you.
Oh, there you are.
Would you ever use the activator belt in the same time with the Exogen hardware?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that becomes a training thing more than a perceptive, because when you're doing both, it's brutal for one thing, and you can't do a lot of it. But my basic schedule there is kind of, I do it a lot in drilling. So we'll drill activator, add Exogen, drill both, take off Exogen, drill activator, take off everything, drill. So you build, take it off so that you're slowing them down, getting the feeling, you're creating more force, taking it back off, getting the feeling again of hitting the ground, take it off, and letting it go. I do a lot of contrast, and it's not really contrast training, but it is contrasting resistances, whether it's activator or Exogen, and the two are a good marriage, by the way. Using them together and then using them separately in the same session, where you just go from one to the other. What's the nice thing about the Exogen? Just take the weights off and then put them back on. You can leave the body while you're training, so it's quick, down and dirty. And so we're able to take that. I don't normally always use the vest, but I do usually use the shorts and the shin, the calf.
Yep.
When I'm doing running drills particularly. And then I will, when I do running drills alone with Exogen, now I'm looking again at vertical loading. And so I'm trying to create more force into the ground. So I'm looking at how do I even an extra kilogram added to the force they're applying is a substantial amount of power increase.
And I think to add to that, Randy, it goes back to knowing your tools. And one thing, again, when Dennis called us, he said, I've got a lot of tools that we use already to put force into the ground. That's kind of not what we're working on. We're working on what they're doing in that air to set that up, and so whether you're using a 1080, a sled, whatever it is, you have to remember that force is actually literally only applied when you're in contact at the ground. As soon as that leg lifts and moves through its cycle, it's unloaded.
Yeah, you're looking at airtime training.
Yep.
And then, of course, the airtime training then gives you the force on the ground. I see the 1080 as a horizontal loading force, by the way. Sleds, 1080 or horizontal loading. But I see Exogen as airtime and vertical loading.
Yeah.
And then activator as vertical loading again. But it's not vertical loading with mass. It's vertical loading with speed. For that force and speed. So you have to overcome that force. People were pretty amazed to see Sue sprinting full speed with an activator belt on. Talk about compliance hardware as well. And then he also sprinted full speed with Exogen on because he could. He wasn't casting much. He learned, that's how he learned not to cast real quick, because like, oh, my hamstrings are sore. Yeah, they will be if you keep running like that. Yeah. So immediately they try to find their own solution. What's so great about these tools is that it helps the athlete find their solution. Compliance hardware.
It helps them find the solution. I want to I want to use
you
that
can tell
as
them, but they have to get into their bag of tricks, you know.
Yeah.
And our job is, we're facilitators. We're here to facilitate them finding their solutions.
It's funny you mentioned that. For those of you who listened in on Dennis Mitchell's one, and I thought, you know, with certainly at the level Randy and Dennis are at, they would have very similar mindsets, and they both said the same thing. And he said, my job isn't to make them fast. My job is to teach them why they're fast and help them connect to that. And you literally just said that they have to tap into their toolbox. It's there. My job is to facilitate. And so with that mindset, maybe we can have a little thought, Randy, because one thing that always blew me away about you is whatever level you've been at, you've always been at the front of the curve of technology. And we've talked a lot about technology tools that you've used, but people can over technology their work as well. You know, just from an overriding perspective, getting a coach and the trainers and people we've got in the audience, how do you want people, how would you suggest people look at the technology? How does it, like, accentuating it? Because you said something here. Sue could feel, you know, he needed to feel what he was doing. He needed to connect with it. And then Exogen and the 1080 helped him to top that up. And in some cases, it helped him to feel it. But you can over technology something, or even over sled it, thinking you're trying to get speed.
Well,
And this is a general advice question,
if
really.
you use too much resistance, you can slow someone down real easy.
Yeah.
Or for instance, if you do, you know, I mean, this is, you know, I had this discussion with Rolf Oman when Rolf first came over to work with me. That in that short time he was with me in China, because it was all about ground contact time, and you know, Rolf didn't get much of a chance to work with the other young sprinters, but because I wanted him to learn how to apply what we were doing with Sue to somebody else so he could learn. But you know, he was asking me, so why aren't you jumping over higher hurdles for more force? And I said, well, we do that in the fall, but I don't want to slow them down that much, you know, because a higher hurdle is a force application. It's a force, a strength exercise. You know, we ones because we want to use the speed side to enhance power. And he goes, oh, you know, crikey, as he said, now I understand why I had so many problems, because we did nothing but high hurdle hops when I was an athlete. I just always felt like it slowed me down. And I said, yeah, it will. That's all you do. In the end, it'll end up taking away what you're trying to achieve. So you have to find that special place, you know. And like for Sue, it was basically 18-inch mini hurdles. That's what we use for hurdle jumps. Believe it or not, we don't use even women's heights, because he could be quick as could be there. So we're looking at that force velocity combination to give me more power. And I could get higher power if I wanted, but I was forced and it was slower. And that's not where I'm going. That's not my world, you know. It's other people's worlds. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of worlds where that occurs, but that's not what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point I'm sort of making, is from an advice standpoint. One is staying at speed and understanding how, like you said, too much resistance or too much loading or too much strength or force can slow someone down. You see a lot of athletes that they do a lot of training, but they don't get the improvement. And would you say that might be one of those areas that is resulting in that? And it could be many things, of course,
You
but
know,
the
when I
general
see
use
people,
of force.
yeah, in general, what I see people not improving is that they do not know how to apply their force very well. And your battle is to teach them how to apply force, which direction, how to do it. Take someone like Christian. Christian was a lifter. Now I say that he just lifted down the field, you know, and that's why he could never be faster. Because we actually didn't do much sprinting with him in the off season because we're making sure that everything was coming back for all of the little tweaks he had from the PCL and the Achilles tendonitis. So when you get someone who's a dominant lifter, they just never learned how to apply force to the ground. Then when he started applying force to the ground, he started feeling it. He's like, wow, this is different. And so, because they look exactly the same. They look, I mean, a trained eye can see it, but for someone who isn't trained, Christian had perfect running form. Problem was his running form was no to the ground. He was just lifting off the ground as quickly as he could instead of actually getting some force in. And we'll see how that applies when he's in the season here and he actually gets to play. So far in the practice, it's worked real well. Well, Bijan was similar, but Bijan started to figure out how to apply force, and man, it was scary when I saw that. You know, as an example, for those of you guys who've ever used Kaiser squat, Bijan started out about 3,000 watts. He ended up just at 6,000 watts on the Kaiser squat, the most I've ever seen. This dude is powerful, you know. So, and that was just in 4 weeks. 4 weeks we did that. So,
You know, it's funny you said that about
questions,
power.
anybody?
If you've got somebody that's pretty fast, they probably got some pretty good power into the ground. But that doesn't always mean that setup and how they're applying it is optimal, because speed is an optimization game.
Well, let's say you take someone like who's run 10.7 in high school. Maybe he was a 10.4 guy. He just never learned how to apply force. You know, I know it sounds crazy, but when you listen to somebody run, and I don't know how many of you just times with the jumps and in the sprints, I'll sit with my back to the track because I want to hear what they're doing.
Yeah.
And you hear them, and you're like, no, are they moving? You know, because you don't hear anything, no force. It's just, you know, it's like, dude, you got to put some force in the ground, and react to it. And it's one of the reasons and here in China, I stopped using the term jump training. And maybe you guys have heard me say this. And I've switched completely over the years. This goes back to 2013, because I used to use it in the States too. But I switched to bounce training. Everything's a bounce. It's all reactive. And that because the Chinese didn't have a word that worked well for jump training. So they had a great word for bounce training. So it was easy to use. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, working here in Asia, I know exactly what you mean. And I saw they definitely understand bounce training from the elite badminton guys to that, and that springiness, it's it's old school tissue pliability. And I remember coming here and watching them do some of their training, and I thought there's nobody in North America that would do that, and they probably couldn't do that. They didn't, of course, they don't have the ground squat toilet, so they didn't have the range of motion, but
Well, it's a little crazy if you think about it for those that are from the States on here, because, I'm here, Warren Seagrave's here, and ran Riders, American coaches. I can throw myself in with those guys. All here in China, training people. And Rain is doing a great job because he's a good coach. Lawrence struggles sometimes because it's hard to adapt American methods. You really can't overlay your Western training on the Chinese. You can after a while, but you can't initially. They're not used to the volume and the intensities that we're capable of doing. just because they've never gone through a collegiate program where they go to a meet and they got to run 4 events in a competition. They run 1 event and they're dying, you know. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing to coach in another language. I still don't speak Chinese, so I'm still coaching in English, and none of the athletes under, which makes what we've accomplished over here even all the. I mean, Raina's guys at least speak English now. You know, that most of them a little bit of English, but your translator becomes your best friend over here because it's the only way you can accomplish something. One of the reasons when you say I moved to technology, one of the reasons I do use more technology because I can display things to them.
Right.
Yeah.
And speaking of that
when
display,
when I first got here, there was no phone, no iPhones, there was no iPads. Nobody had ever seen video of themselves, believe it or not.
yeah.
Amazing to me. It's amazing.
Well,
Anyways, I interrupted you. Sorry.
no. You brought that up because I wanted to bring this up earlier, and you talked about knowing how they're doing, getting that feedback, what they're feeling. Um, and from the technology perspective, the kind of things that you use to measure and that the numbers, and again, this is because this is a speed session. We want people to learn something they can go away. What are the daily measures you look at with a speed athlete, with a sprint, let's say track and field mostly, and maybe that's the same with some of your invaluable guys or the program people you've had in from team sport. But what are your daily, kind of weekly, monthly measures you look at and that you find invaluable, and the tools that you put in place just as an overview? And how do you use that? Just to give people a reflection on what numbers you're interested in. Again, is it, or are you overdoing it? Because I do think technology can always, somebody said this to me the other day. We were hiring some new designer, and this guy said, yeah, I'm learning AI right now because I want to be able to use AI. I don't want AI to use me. And he was a young 25-year-old, and I thought that's really smart of him. I was quite impressed. But you know what I'm asking you, I think. That daily, weekly, monthly numbers you look at.
Oh, it's hard to ask me because I'm a bit of a technocrat, you know, from that perspective. So we do have a question there, and I'll get back. I typed in, but we could talk about it more.
We'll jump into those 2 questions right after this, because I think there's a couple
You
of
have
questions
frozen up
popping
on
up.
me. Can anybody hear me still?
Yeah, can hear you.
Let me just check and see if yeah, you're losing me, unfortunately. Hold on, let me see if I
I
can
can hear you, Randy. I can hear
nope,
you.
I'm still connected. Okay. Can't hear you very well, Joseph. You're breaking up on me now.
You're good.
Let's see. Jacob, you had that question. Do you want to ask it to everybody out loud here?
Yeah, hey Randy, Joe, appreciate you guys putting this on. I basically just threw a question in there to say, what did you find was the most effective means of driving horizontal power numbers up for Bingtian? So, I know I'd be curious to see how what kind of metrics you had from training. I'm just going off the Tokyo breakdown, I think with Beat that PJ did, but they had the force velocity profiles in there for a lot of world-class sprinters. And then Bingtian's numbers at 34.9 watts per kilo was the highest by quite a considerable amount. So just be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, you know, it was purposeful. I mean, I do almost everything with purpose. So Sue started out, let's just talk about where his biggest power leak was, which was his calf. And you guys have heard me say this, but he so what would happen is he could apply some force to the ground, but he was absorbing it all. So the calf couldn't accept it. So that was the first place we started, and where you usually start, you know, what's happening on the ground. I usually start on the ground and at the occiput, so I balance the body between the head and the feet from a strictly therapy standpoint. But Sue was at like 730 watts. You know, I mean, the number was, I had a lot of women who were stronger than he was in the calf. And then he ended up, he's now, I have not, Wilma, done it with EMG. I don't have one here. I wish I did, but I'm sure that those guys have. And just like with, I'm going to get off for a second, Wilma. Just like when we used vibration platforms back in the day, we would do it with a EMG so we could see exactly what frequency elicited the greatest response. And you know, it's a great tool. Just have to be careful with it. Joseph may have EMG studies, but so get back to what we did to get those numbers. So Sue ended up around 2,800 watts, by the way. Now Christian and Bijan were very similar. They started out, I mean, in general, if I had to say there's a muscle in the body that doesn't get trained very well, it is the soleus. Is it the magic button? No, but it's definitely a big problem if you're applying force and it's absorbing it. Both Christian and Bijan end up over 2,000 watts. I think Christian snuck over maybe 22. Bijan right in that same range now in this year. So I'm looking at, okay, here's my power leak. So I can't accept more power. So I got to build that first. Now I'm going to create more power. So I'm looking at the runner. I'm looking at the Kaiser squat, basically air mass squats as well. So I'm creating power about the hip. Now I've got the force side. So now I go to the activator belt, and now I've got another force because that's still against that force to try to create. So I'm moving from the weight room to these other tools, which we talk about compliance hardware, but I label those as integration tools. They're integrating the weight room to the field or to the track, and I see Exogen falling into the integration tools category. It's compliance hardware, but it's an integration tool. It helps you integrate. So once we got them being able to accept the force, now I want to create more force. I want to do those big muscle things, and then the small muscle stuff is where we got the activator and the Exogen. If that answers some of your P-max numbers, because those are obviously with Sue ran as fast as it did, it's because we worked very hard on the first 7 steps. I mean, his accelerate by 10 meters, you could see how far away it was. By 30 meters, he was killing them. So, it's just a matter of working it over and over and over. Oops.
I'm just curious as well, because you mentioned that 1080's means of measuring force velocity profiling. Do you still find value in those numbers? And if so, how are you what's the value you see in those numbers from 1080?
Well, the force velocity, they look at force. They look at the resistance you're putting on the machine. I don't look at I know what the resistance is. I look at what force you're applying. And I'm really referring to assisted, because resisted is simple. There's, you could use T-Apex for resisted just as easily and save yourself, $15,000. But on the assisted side, you don't build a force velocity curve off of the resistance on the assisted side. You build a force velocity curve off of the force that you're actually applying to the job, which you can measure with the 1080. And applying to the ground, which you can measure with the 1080. And as I said, if you're pulling in too fast, you're going to have two things occur. You're going to have very little distance, very little force. Sub 30 basically means you're pulling. They can't handle it, and they're just bouncing off it. Or over 40, and that means that they're blocking because they're scared. So back them down, bring it back up. Raina and I both rarely do much above. We're typically between 10.5 meters per second and about 11.3, 11.4. That's assisted sprinting,
Yeah.
There's a question here about Exogen in the pool. I don't use Exogen in the pool. I do use activator in the pool, and I do use other resisted systems in the pool to enhance resistance. The old hydrotone stuff still works pretty well. There's some other discs that you can put on the ankle that allow you to work the hamstring. Did a lot of that with Bijan and Christian. Of course, I do work every single day with the NFL guys. Track as well when it's available to them. NFL guys, so they just buy a house and put a pool in. It's simple for them. Yeah, I mean, it's
Well, and there's
life.
it's funny
what
you mentioned
happens.
that. We just started with LaShawn Merritt and James Hampton. They've got a spree program out of the U.S. there between LA and Florida. And the first thing when I was talking to them, they asked is, can this be used in the pool? Because we actually do they do a lot of recovery work and loading in the pool. And so it was interesting, and I said, I'll send you all the stuff from China Olympic program in what their sprint swimmers are doing in the pool. But yeah, again, what it tells me is it's just a tool with incredible versatility. You can kind of use it everywhere you want, but you do need to know how to use it. You do, and in
And could you use it in
combination.
the pool? Yeah, of course.
Can I ask you something,
Yeah.
Randy, on this?
I mean,
You mentioned a
can you use
lot
it
of.
in the pool? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, a lot of these tools together. You think about that answer you gave there: Kaiser Squad, Runner, 1080, Sleds, Activator, Exogen. All right, now somebody's got to have a pretty good budget and a pretty nice toolbox. But again, just it takes time to build these things over time, correct? And I just think it's important for people to understand we don't throw all this on them on day one. Because again, a lot of the coaches, and I know that many of the coaches here, they've got these short periods with young athletes, youths, you've got 6-8 weeks. Is there a like go-to that you'd want to say, look, if I've got 8 weeks with an athlete and they're probably coming in for my off season or maybe at Christmas before the next spring season, what would I jump into realistically? And it could be any tech,
Well,
this is
it
an
depends on
informative
the.
information session.
Well, yeah, it's a loaded question because it depends on the age of the athlete, the sport, time of year, a number of variables. In general, if it's kids, I don't encourage all that much
Yeah.
conditioning, if you wish. Whereas a lot of people condition them because the parents want them to be tired and all that.
Yeah.
But you can condition them technically as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that
Well,
comes
I
back
I
to,
think I can add.
you said
Go ahead.
something earlier about
It's so
kids
when
and,
you
and
ask
getting them
that,
to feel.
yeah, and so 4 weeks, which is actually a pretty long time, and if unless you've got a really dedicated child these days, and they exist for sure. I am going to work first on the technical component. And that is how, by the way, how I approach things. I create the technical model, then I train the model. I don't train, then try to figure out the model after. And at some point, you actually get into concurrent training and modeling. But initially, you try, because that's, if you get the model right, you're going to reduce the potential for injury anyways. So, you've got, training is all about trying to reduce the potential for injury. Weight room is for sure potential for injury. And then as you get this technical model created and they're starting to do, now you can add in conditioning the model, and that takes, there is no slow journey here. You're absolutely right about that. The short journey, they're all long journeys.
Yeah.
Probably the longest journey in track and field is maybe the hammer or triple jump. They're both very long journeys to master those.
Yeah. Just to jump out because we got one more question around Su Bingtian, and then we're going to sort of look to start wrapping a couple of things. Hold on, guys. Just going to do these one by one. Jacob from Australia. Earlier you mentioned changing the butt kick action in top speed for Bingtian. Can you elaborate on what you had success with in changing this action? I think that's also a pretty general question because butt kick is it's a sprinting action.
Well, yeah, let me going to use my folder here. See if I can
And because there's interest, just for people to know, we're supposed to stop at 9, but we are going to continue with a couple of these questions. So don't worry about time. But Randy does have a
because I have to leave
hard stop.
actually. Practice. Yeah. So here's theoretically things happening, and I haven't had a biomechanist, not even Ralph had. Well, Ralph was just starting to think about it and work on it before he passed away. Boy, do we miss him. But my thoughts are this.
No, go ahead.
My thoughts are this. So here's a high butt kick. Here's the high. Here's your hips up here. Here's your heel. Now, we know that we'd like to have the switching action at least have the opposite thigh a little bit ahead. Now, like in Sue's case, his opposite thigh was way ahead. But what we wanted to play with, particularly with someone like short levers, you can do it with a long lever guy too, is that at some point you've got that's let's say a high butt kick, okay? And you've got this focused mass, but you've also got a lever that's very short. So you've got focused mass with a lever that's short that moves quickly. Now you've got at what point to actually get the greatest force application horizontally while you're reducing that lever. And we found Sue was about, if you can see that, was about right there. And that allowed him to recover and then drive that kneecap down the track. Probably because he was a triple jump coach, Marcel Jacobs guy, had Marcel running a little bit like a triple jumper. And it worked pretty effectively. It's that finding that magic spot. So I played with this one day just for the fun of it, because I went back and I was watching all the really great female long jumpers, and there's this low cast with a longer lever than the men have, and I'm like, okay, so at what point? So what I did is I took a brace and I set it at different angles, and I had one of the women step and throw, basically step and drive. And it turns out about 110 degrees gave them their greatest force on the board, which means it probably gave them the greatest force in running, because we saw that an incomplete recovery just of parallel is actually a better sprint mechanics than to have a high butt kick. It's the 100 meters at 60. It changes a little bit in the 2 and the 4. But so that extra force, which then drives the thigh down the track, then back in, becomes something that I think needs to be examined by the scientists now.
This was a very similar when Najee Harris came to us and I worked with his team on his speed mechanics. It was exactly that issue. And again, from the perspective of using the product, because the first thing is, I mean, Najee Harris is 250 pounds. He's got massive leg weight that he's lifting, but he wasn't aware of how the left and the right leg, there was an imbalance, and one of them was closing, one of them wasn't. And their issue was, how do we get him to feel that? And it was specifically the first part of the process was putting load on the right area. So he finished a run, he came back, he's like, oh, I know what my leg's doing. I can feel it in real time. And the first week was spent making him aware. And then 4 weeks later, we loaded him.
Yeah. As I said, my first use of Exogen is a proprioceptive tool.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
And by that, just for everybody to
understand, where am I in space and time?
And by that, understand again, is because you have that freedom to put the load anywhere. I always mention it to this. This is a 100-gram load, all right? The smallest one is 50 grams. We actually were going to discontinue the 50-gram because I thought from a weight perspective, it was too light. But then it was the head coach. He was a former 400-meter Olympic runner from Australia, who now is the technical coordinator for at the World Athletic Federation for Southeast Asia, Robert Ballard. And Robert said, like, Joe, that little load is the perfect load to put on the body to let them feel that part of the body, but not add resistance. And he was the same. He was saying, you know, I want them to feel where that mass is. And I keep telling people, don't, if you want to buy Exogen just to add weight, it's better you go to Amazon and buy $100 weight vest, and if that's your goal. But the technical part of the movement is always the place to start first. And from there, as you said, then you can determine how much load is enough, rather than, like you said, work the program and then look at the model later.
Or work the model, then add the program.
Yeah. And so,
And
well,
guys, I do have to go in just in 3 minutes or so. Is there any more questions? I'll try to answer as best I can. Or you're welcome to, if you have any questions, you guys can email me too.
I wasn't going to offer it, but I was going to ask if you want to put your email in there. We got a bunch of people on it, and I think a lot of people
That's
would be
okay.
keen
Sure.
to chat. I can tell you, Randy is very open to the conversation,
Yeah,
and you've
not
been
a
a
problem.
fantastic resource. If there isn't another question right now, then I would like to at least take a moment to say, first off, thanks for all the great guidance and coaching myself personally over the 30 years, and for taking the time with us today. And I think just giving a really nice overview, not just of the product and what we're doing, but as you and I were talking, you know, we want these sessions to be educational, people to walk away and say, I learned something, you know, and I certainly learned something. And I always do a little summary here, you know, you talked about this. The athlete can't really correct what they can't feel. And all correction has to be self-correction. And maybe that's a summary point to end on from a thought from you.
No, that's our job. We're facilitating monsters if we can. I mean, it's how do we, I always call us dream weavers, but at the same time, we're helping people achieve their dreams. At the same time, we have to get ourselves and our own egos out of the way so that the athlete can find their own way. And when you're a young coach, your tendency is to express your intelligence to everybody. We've all done it. Later on, as you get older, it's your desire is to let the athlete express their own intelligence, and their physical, or their what we call either biological awareness or their just ability to express their physicality, and yet it has to be guided. So you've got that guided discovery aspect. It can't just be let go, or everybody would be butt kicking themselves to death in the world. And when I say, and I said this 30 years ago, I remember saying this to Lauren. I remember to this day saying it to him. I said, Lauren, max velocity sprinting is a separate biomotor aspect. And he goes, well, yeah, but at that time, now of course he says that. Petra's asking me what the T apex. Petra, yes, worked fine.
I'm not going to let you go, Randy.
Sorry.
You're not going to training. You're going to be late for that warm-up.
I've got it. I just sent a note at the track saying just slow your warm-up down. Yeah, but I'm almost losing my train of thought. Three things going on here. If we can,
the self-correction
as an artist, yeah. But I'm just thinking about the science and the art, because as the coach, we need the science to be with us, and sometimes you have athletes where the science actually they can understand it and want it, but the art of coaching is actually taking that science and turning it into the language the athlete can understand. And then more importantly, is the language they can understand, but the language that they can then use to build their own program, their own software. Which is why I come back to compliant software, you know. It helps them find themselves. And there's nothing we can do better than that.
Yeah. And I think it's a wonderful place, because you do have to go. It's a wonderful place to finish on that from a coaching perspective. And I just want to say again, Randy, thank you so much. Oh wait, there's Brandon Isaac. Have used the exosuit as a means to prepare them to sprint or build strength as a preparatory tool. Oh, there you go.
I think we've been talking about that, haven't we? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
let's let you get to training.
Oh, will this video?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess the video will be on your website. But yeah, if you have any questions, please remember, guys, I am in China, so I'm 12 hours from the U.S. East Coast. Australia, I'm basically 2 hours ahead, behind, depending on how you look at it, and 15 hours from the West Coast of the U.S. So, yeah, any questions? I'm getting some emails now, so I'll be more than happy to answer them. I do have to run because I have to finish workouts and build a PowerPoint for another meeting tomorrow morning. So thank you. I really appreciate you guys dropping in, and I hope you got something out of this that I can give you a little something to think about that you can use.
Thank you, Randy. And for those on here, stay for 5 minutes at the end. We're going to look at a quick case study with Daryl Nita on her hip issue. Daryl Nita, of course, one of the fastest women in the world. And then we're going to wrap up with the end of the summer speed program, the last 2 weeks, to look at the loading for 5 minutes. So if you want to stay in and join that, you're more than welcome. Randy, I want to say thank you again for everything, and have a great day on the track, and we will be seeing you soon, my friend.
Talk to you later, guys. Thank you.
All right. Well, as always, a lot of information, and do reach out to Randy. Like I said, he is one of the good guys. He's more than happy to share his knowledge and his information, and he will respond to you. If you have any difficulty getting in touch with him, Randy and I chat a lot, so please reach out to me as well, and I'll help you with that. As I said, and as we do on each of these sessions, we add a little bonus just specifically around the product, a couple of technical things to understand you. Again, the use of the tool in the technical conditioning of an athlete. I have a short case study with one of the sprinters. Actually, Coach Marco, who coaches Daryl, was a student of Randy. So as soon as Coach Marco went off on his own, built his own sprint group out of Europe, he contacted me immediately, got a bunch of kit. And this was a very unique case study that applies to a lot of athletes, and I wanted to share briefly before we have a run. Okay. So we take care of loading. I've got my exogen guy here, girl here. We did a very simple process. All right. It's in there. Week 1, we needed her to feel that hip. So we loaded with 100-gram loads on the right hip, above and below the hip. Now, if you think what Randy was just talking about, it's very proximal to the hip versus distal to the hip. And this was designed so she could feel that hip. That was issue number 1. And we had, for the first week, we had her run with 100 grams here, 100 grams here, essentially that load being like the coach's hand. Think how you coaches always put your hand on a part of the body you want them to feel. Well, now that load is there while they're running. And it's not enough resistance to be highly strenuous on the hip yet. So what happened is we loaded that part of the hip so she could feel it. Week 2, to balance it out, we added another load above her hip here because the stability has to come from the whole core. Remember, any joint issue has to be worked from above and below the joint. This is another one of the things we've learned about wearable resistance. Although the hip is lifting that thigh, just remember, it has to stabilize here to lift that thigh. So if all we do is put weight here and think, well, that's going to bring my leg up, we haven't addressed where that power stability is coming from. And this is what we call loading above and below the joint. We've got YouTube videos about this. Reach out to me. I'll send some of that to you. So this is Daryl's week 2. Week 2, 100 grams on the left and right side of the hip so she could feel her hips stable. That's ultimately gave her control. Then we have a small proximal load on that thigh. Week 3 and 4, very simple. We took that, we went up to a 200 gram load and we put that load down on the thigh. Now she has a real resistance on that load at high speed. Remember what I wrote in there? Kinetic energy, 1/2 mass times velocity squared. Mass is halved, velocity is multiplied. You get tremendous kinetic energy, and kinetic energy tells you what you need to know about joint stress, okay? There's a lot of joint stress when kinetic energy is high. So we knew already 200 grams on the thigh was going to be the training load, and that became her workload now to make that right hip stable and keep that high knee recovery. 4 weeks later, they sent me video, said, Joe, perfect. She's running well. The 5th week was pre-race week. And Marco called me up and he said, I got one more question. Daryl doesn't want to wear the weight anymore. She's too close to competition. It's hard when she trains. She wants to stay light. And I got that. He said, but I have a question. He said, I don't think it's fully permanent yet. I think we need to at least have a session or 2 to keep her feeling that weight before she actually races. And he asked, what do you think? So I was thinking, all right, well, this is typical high performance question. What do you do a week before a race? Do nothing and just hope for the best? And I realized 4 weeks was probably just long enough to start creating some level of permanent change. She's super highly elite and she can, manifest that change very quickly. But if we do nothing, I got a feeling it's very easy when it comes to a high intensity race for her to just revert back. And I said, I think you need to have at least one session that week to reinforce what she's doing just in the warm up. Let her have a session, let her load, let her feel that load. Don't go for any kind of fatigue. Reinforce what we've been working on, take the load off, let her run. He was like, I agree. And he instinctually knew she needed a little bit of stimulus still. She went to the World Championships. She ran 10.9, her personal best. I think it was a UK record. And of course, that's not due to Exogen. It's due to all those great things the program does. But when you get the right tool in to fix technical issues, and I keep saying this, when you fix technique and skill, performance increases. Not maybe, it always does. Whether you win or not depends on your competition, but performance always increases. And again, that was just a very direct loading profile we did, getting you to think about, I want to load above and below the joint. Like Randy said, don't go distal too fast, especially on the hamstring and the calf, because you can tweak a hamstring with a light load at high speed. And that was just another case study that we worked through almost on a daily basis here. I will tell you this, again, back to that hamstring issue. I was working with New Zealand All Black Sevens. We had a player, and also loading with Exogen, took the weight off, and his high speed, his overspeed set, when the weight came off, he immediately felt his hamstring. And so again, this is why when you look at our recommendations and you load, unload, your first rep after unloading should be about 80-90%. Don't give them any speed, direction, or time. Just say, all right, I just want you to run. Let your body reconnect. Because the system needs time to do that. And as soon as it gets time to do that, your second, your third set, you can hammer them. And this is what we call always finish light. Don't finish your training with Exogen, finish your training light and free, and gradually work through that. And if they ever tell you they're tired, if they ever tell you they're feeling anything, whatever it is, just take the load off. You can always load another day. Now okay, so there's how can the Exogen assist with athletes need to focus on maintaining a neutral pelvis to avoid sitting? Well, we just talked about that. Now the sitting issue, we can't go through it all right now, but sitting also has to be dealt with from the back of the pelvis. Okay, sitting is that breakdown where they come into their pelvis. All running collapses into the pelvis. Marathon, sprinting, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 2 hours. And so that sitting happens by controlling the pelvis. And so most of the loading we do at the start, and I'll give you this, Kaylin Whitney, okay, one of the best 400 meter runners in history, world champion, Olympic medalist, one of Dennis's group. we specifically worked with her on that. All right. Now for sprinters, you'll notice sprinters very much have a very pronounced butt. And that means they've got a top shelf, a middle, and a bottom shelf. And those are loading areas. So when we're trying to control the pelvis, we look at loading around the top shelf. And that load here is not, it does have a vertical weight, but it gives them proprioceptive feeling of when their pelvis is starting to break down, so they work on self-correcting and focus. And remember, in our education, we always talk about assistive and resistive loading. You want the athlete to feel what they're doing, because some people can correct their motion just by feeling the problem. So with first thing we needed, what Dennis had asked is, all right, Kaylin's not feeding that glute. We need her to feel that. I can see at 300 meters, she's not getting that force into the ground. And we started loading her through here and at the front of the hip in the same spot. What essentially that does, it puts load on that pelvis. She became aware of it. And the first thing she said when she got back was, okay, I can feel exactly when my pelvis started shifting. And then we asked, well, can you control that? And she goes, yeah. Like I'm fighting to do that. And so then you watch her and you let her run and see if she can start self-correcting. If she can't, then we're going to start adding load, which is going to force the stabilizers of the hip to work harder. And then we have to use a resistive load to force those muscles to get stronger. So don't always assume that an athlete might have a technical issue and they need to get stronger. Sometimes it's just awareness. And the beauty of the product is we can technically go through that process. And that's why even on a training session, we'll do an assistive load where they feel their body working first before we start adding resistance down the chain. It's all about them connecting, feeling that as well. And the last part is, if it's a pelvis issue, you're probably loading in the pelvis. If it's a hip issue, you're loading in the hip. If it's a hamstring, it's going to be glute and hams, maybe the calf. We call that load the problem. And again, all of this is in our starter guide. There's a lot of information out. Message, I'll put my email in there right now, www. Wait, Jay Dalsetti. Most of you have it already at leelateam.com. I think that's it there. Feel free to email me. My WhatsApp number is also here, +60 1949912333. That's here in Malaysia. Again, I am on that time difference. I'll be back in North America and the US and Canada in about 2-3 weeks. We're starting to run our fall program, so we can reach out on the North American time zone in a couple of weeks. Message me here. I'm 12 hours ahead of New York and 15 of LA, just like Randy. We're going to, one more thing. Last thing just to look at. Weeks 5 and 6 of that 6-week program, you can see the progressions. This is the speed program specifically for acceleration. Here you've got now we've got a heavy load. We've got 300 to 400 grams per leg. And you'll notice it's still loaded. It's still loaded proximally up near the hip. We've got proximal loading, those bellies up at the calf. If you are using the top, keep the loading around the shoulders. Your posterior loading for max velocity, again, the belly's up near the glute. That's considered a proximal load. The belly or the round part near the knee, proximal load. And just let me zoom that out. And those are those last 2 weeks of loading. For anybody who has been working on the program, if you don't have a copy of this program, we'll send it to you. It shows you weekly progressions for speed training, moving between anterior and front side mechanics for acceleration and posterior and backside mechanics. And it allows the athlete and the coach to really understand how loading at high speed sort of affects the body in a very safe manner. And that's kind of the wrap, you guys. If there's not any other questions, thank you, everybody, especially everybody back home in North America who have stayed up late. Really excited to continue working with you. If you've got any questions, reach out. And just to give you a little teaser, the Masterclass series for the summer is stopping, but we are starting our fall Masterclass, and we are going to be changing it up by not bringing in coaches. We're going to be bringing in some of the best athletes in the world. So we're going to be bringing elite sprinters, team sport athletes. I won't tell you who yet, but they're going to be good. and we'll get the chance to listen to them about their process coming out as, you know, the very best in the world. So stay tuned with that. Stay in touch with us, like, share, and all those kind of things. And as always, let's keep moving forward. Thank you very much. This video will be ready in the next 4 days. Amir will be sending it out. If you don't see it in a week, check your spam. All right, everybody. Have a great day, everyone. Ciao. Piotr, thanks for staying up, my friend.
Thank you too.
All right, everyone. Have a great day. Ciao.